Seen that use. Hi guys, so we'll come to the second part of the video about post. We've seen that the use of fiber posts is quite tricky because the problem is that they rely on a weak basis, that it is adhesion, and adhesion on dentin, especially root dentin, after a while tend to suffer from a form of degradation and biomechanics because the fiber post has the same flexural flex together with the build-up, so there is no stiffening of the core at all, there is scarce loading of the root, and so the problem of bending of the abutment, fatigue of the abutment, and the cracking and fracture of the abutment and failure of the abutment is always the same. In my experience, most of the failures come in, when the abutment is heavily compromised, of course, between 4 and 6 years. Of course, we are talking about teeth where a post was really needed. Because, of course, if you put a fiber post on a class 2 restoration on an odontoclitic tooth, of course, this will be successful for a long time, unless you do a big odontic success and a big shoulder. So in order to destroy everything, doing exactly the opposite of what in this course I'm teaching. But if I want to save a bit from this fatigue, the pericervical dentin, and I want to add the post in order to do this, what do I need from a post in order to stiffen the complex? What do I need? We have already seen this on the finite element analysis. Is that I want to charge a little bit the root, of course, in order to remove a bit of load from the pericervical dentin. And what I need is exactly the opposite of the receipt that we receive every day at courses and congresses from the modern dentistry. And it is a more rigid post and less need of adhesion, because adhesion relying on adhesion is a weak strategy. And this is what I use, the kind of post that I use. And I have to say that my father used this kind of post for decades with a stunning result that I was not able to understand and believe, and I was doing fiber post because I was modern. So what happens that when we put a rigid post, the rigid post charge the dentinal root, of course. But doing this remove a part of the load from the pericervical dentin, and this is the aim, together with helping the retention and the stability of the core. So we share the occlusal load between the coronal part of the tooth, the pericervical dentin, and the root. More rigid is the post, more the load is moved on the root. So in this case, we have to find a balance. We will speak about this. The ability of the root to be loaded is related to the residual thickness, because the same concept that is made for the pericervical dentin we can do for the root. If I have a root like this with a small hole and a rigid post, how many chances do you think that you have to break something? Not so much, not so many. But if you have a root, and this is the hole, and you have a rigid post, that it is the way in which in the past most of the cast posts were made, the chances that the root will be loaded exceeding its ability to withstand the load is higher. So like we did, so again, we have to understand the material, like we did the material, and the section of the material, because the dentin is a material, the root dentin is a material itself. It's able to be charged, is able to accept a load, but of course is able to accept a load in comparison with its thickness. So what we want is to save as much as dentin also in the root canal. And this is the reason, because even here a minimal endodontic and the minimal shaping of the portion where we will put the post is important in order to save everything. This is a great case I pick up from Facebook. But if we see from the tooth failed because of a stripping, of a problem on the furcal area of this tooth that we can appreciate on the last slide. But the reason is always the same. we dentists are overconfident when we drill. We dentists do endodontic instrumentation, endodontic access, we do prosthetic preparation. We always work like these teeth were buildings. Instead, teeth are very small. Try to look how many times you extract a tooth endodontically treated, and you see the Guttapercha, the endodontic treatment in transparency. This is the reality of endodontic. Next time that you remove a tooth endodontically treated, look, and you will see that in many times you will see in transparency, you will see the Guttapercha. You will see the Guttapercha, the endodontic treatment, the red of the Guttapercha. This is the reality. We work in very limited spaces. And this is the reason because I really love this kind of treatment made by, some of these are made by John Cademy and by other American endodontists following this approach of the minimal invasiveness. And you see how much dentin is saved, how much pericervical dentin is saved, how much the anatomy of the pot chamber is saved, so that no dentin in the pericervical area has been touched. So, a minimal endodontic shaping increases greatly the root ability to be loaded. Because we've seen that a more rigid post gives more load to the root, a too much flexible post, like Faber post, gives zero load to the root. But how much stiff and how to avoid adhesion? Okay, how much stiff? We have no data at all, because we know, for example, that when you use cast post, not to use chromocobaltium alloy, just because it's too rigid, but we advise to use gold, for example, just because the stiffness of the gold is less. About the use of post, for example, what do I use? Honestly, for a reasoning, very simplified and empiric, we can say, but a reasoning that has been validated by decades of experience looking at the failures that my father had using Dentatus. So, I want to remind you this formula about stiffness, and this is very empirical. If I have 1 millimeter of space for placing this post, okay, and like in this case, the wall thickness of dentin is 4 millimeters. If I place something, if there is a ratio between 1 and 4 of the space for the post and the total thickness, I can infer, but this is a reason, we just take this without being too precise. I can infer that something that it is 4 times more than the modulus of Young of the dentin may be a good choice. So if the modulus of Young of the dentin is 16-18 MPa, I will use a multiply of 4 and obtain something like 72-80 MPa. Okay, if I use a 1 millimeter post. If I look at the material that we have and at the modulus of Young, I will see that titanium is 150, maybe it's too much. Okay, brass is 90 MPa, and this is a very good option. Stainless steel is 200 MPa, is again too much. Gold is another great solution with 80 MPa. So the reality is that the best material are in this range, between 70, 80, 90. So the best material for a post, it's gold and brass. Gold, of course, nowadays is very expensive, so I think that a good solution is going with brass. Also because there are some posts like Dentatus that are already made in brass. Brass is 90 MPa, and this is the post that I use. I use this post also because this has been proved by the experience of decades from my father with failed cases. I mean, I saw that when there are some catastrophic failures of the bridge and there is a huge load on the post, I saw many times not the fracture of the root, but the bending of the post. Okay? So I can infer from this experience and this reasoning that brass, metal posts with brass are a good choice because they are rigid enough in order to stiffen the core. The fact that they can be screwed gives them a stability, a mechanical stability, so that adhesion is not so important and adhesion is protected by the stability of the post. And also, in case of accident, we can say the proof of the time showed me that the post bend in most of the cases instead of breaking the root. So nowadays what I use brass dentatus post, taking advantage of the mechanical stabilization of slide screwing, or in severe cases I switch, few cases I have to be honest, to cast post with gold alloy. This when anatomical spaces is not rounded and it is not possible to stabilize the dentatus post in any way. Or if I have, this is another indication, if I have an emergence of the post that forced me to cut the post so that the built-up material is mainly composite. What do I mean? If I have an incisors